All right. Good morning, Doug. Today, I'd like to talk about Ukraine once again. It seems to me escalation is the order of the day, and there's one particular headline that I saw that I think summed it up really well. Let me share my screen really quick here so that we can see it. Go. And that's this. It's a race against time before Europe engulfed in war.
A race against time to get tanks to the, this is funny. That is Orwellian. It's a race against time to get tanks to Ukraine before Europe's engulfed. But that's exactly what's going to precipitate a war with Russia, getting tanks to Ukraine. This is insane.
Are you saying that tanks are not defensive weapons, Doug?
Well, they're not generally viewed as defensive weapons. I mean, they're vehicles that you use in a blitzkrieg when you're on the attack. No, they're not defensive weapons, unless you dig them in for defense, but that's not the case.
No.
So this is absolutely crazy. I've been following this war in the Ukraine, and just in case nobody's heard my basic proposition for this, what we have here is a pointless border war between two shithole dictatorships, and it shouldn't matter what Ukraine and Russia do with each other. I mean, the whole thing, Putin said, Ukraine isn't even a real country, and everybody mocked him and then started, well, first of all, it used to be called the Ukraine. That's what it was called, the Ukraine. Now everybody calls it simply Ukraine, giving it more legitimacy than it had before.
And this is very new, very new. Like I remember even just a decade ago, we called it the Ukraine.
That's right. So it's a sign of political correctness that you drop the. But the fact of the matter is, just like that whole part of the world, there were, it's like armies, Scythians and Persians and Medes and Russians and Mongolians. Ever since almost the dawn of history, armies have been running back and forth across the Ukraine. And the Ukraine actually means borderland for just that reason. And a lot of people are unaware of the fact that it never, ever existed as a country until like 1922, when Lenin made it into a Soviet Socialist Republic for his own reasons. The best, I think, analog to the Ukraine is Kurdistan, which is an area of Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, which is inhabited by a group called the Kurds, but they don't have their own country either. So that's the best analog. This whole idea of national borders is stupid to start with, because if you look at a map that's been updated over time as to where the borders of the Ukraine have been since it was, all the borders of these countries, Poland and Czechoslovakia, they're always, the colors of the map on the wall are always flowing. So this is all crazy. It's defending the borders of the Ukraine, a new country which doesn't even exist. Anyway, just to recap this for people that might be unaware of it, everything was going along fairly well. Well, fairly well, unless you consider that the Russians, which is to say the Stalinists, wound up killing what it's called the Holodomor in the 1930s, where nobody knows, but 3-4 million Ukrainians were starved to death. The wheat breadbasket of the world, and Stalin manages to starve the locals together. So maybe there aren't good relations between Russians and Ukrainians, even though their languages are very, very similar and mutually intelligible. It's a matter of accent mostly, as I understand it. But getting back to how this all started, the Ukrainians had a corrupt puppet who was a puppet of the Russians until 2014. Then we had the famous Maidan Revolution, and it was replaced with an American puppet. And after that revolution in 2014, the Donetsk republics seceded from the Ukraine. And immediately, because they seceded, Ukraine attacked them. And at the same time, the Russians took control of the Crimea. So that's where it's been since then. But now they're ramping this thing up to, bringing in the Europeans and the Americans in what basically is just a border war between these. And frankly, if I was a Martian looking at this from outside, I'd say, well, these Russians were provoked because those two republics on the border of Russia and Ukraine, where most of the action's been since 2014, when the Ukrainians launched an attack against it, I can understand how the Russians, since those republics are Russian-speaking and Russian cultural, not Ukrainian, I can certainly understand why Putin would have said, all right, let's just settle this once and for all. And, we're going to retake the Crimea, which has always been Russian since for the last couple hundred years, and settle this thing in the Ukraine. And we don't want to conquer the Ukraine. We don't want to blow up Kiev. We don't want to do any of this. We just want to solve this border dispute. And if I was a Martian, I would say, yeah, that's pretty reasonable. These people were provoked for a long period of time. But now it's getting completely out of control. And this thing with bringing in Western tanks is highly provocative. I mean, what are you going to do? If you keep poking somebody in the eye, you can expect them to punch you in the nose. And that's the next step. So this thing is escalating, seriously.
Is there anything more provocative to the Russian soul than the idea of a bunch of German tanks rolling into their territory? I feel like that would trigger anybody.
It really is funny. And of course, you have to remember that the Russians and the Germans fought during World War I, and it was really bloody. And then, of course, World War II. And I guess we're going to go for a third round. But why are the Germans allowing themselves to get dragged into this thing? I mean, the Russians were just shipping them natural gas before, and it was a pretty gemütlich arrangement. So this is, I think it's the Americans that are in back of all of this.
Yeah,
pushing.
maybe I've heard the people say the Americans and the Brits, probably it's like the Anglo-American, empire or something like that, that it's the combined effort seems to be driving this much more so than the European powers, you think?
Yeah, and there are a lot of questions. There are always unanswered questions regarding this type of thing, because of course, as has been said, in war, the first casualty is the truth. So you can't believe anything that you hear, or frankly, anything that any of the talking heads say on the media in the US or anywhere for that matter. But Ukraine had its share of the Soviet army. They had lots and lots of armor and other weapons. So what's happened to all those Soviet tanks that were in the Ukraine? I presume they're all destroyed if they need new tanks. And,
yes.
And they say that 145,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed so far. I mean, this is what's said. And of course, a lot of Russians have been killed too. So what's really going on that the Americans feel like they have to now send the Ukrainians tanks? And will that do any good? Because, these, it's not like sending them a bunch of rifles, giving the peasants a bunch of rifles and telling them, go over there and shoot those guys in the other uniform.
Right.
Okay. Tanks are, highly evolved weapons systems at this point.
Right.
So how are they going to be maintained and fueled, and the ammunition? because the British and the American and the German and the French tanks all use different ammunition. So who's going to supply these things? It's a matter of logistics. So anyway, as they do this, they're provoking the Russians. The Ukrainians won't be able to use them effectively. I presume that we're going to have advisors there.
Sure, we already do, operating the HIMARS and even the more advanced artillery pieces that they have.
Yeah.
So it seems to me, Doug, this whole they're making this big deal out of, I think the U.S. is sending something like 31 Abrams tanks, 31. It's like a brigade's worth or something like that, and but it's basically inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, especially when you consider that Ukraine started off with something around 900 tanks when this whole thing started, and they're all gone. So 31 of those, and maybe 88 of the, of the German tanks. It's not going to, turn the tide in any way. And, and then there's talk about how long it'll take to get that stuff there anyway. But I think what's ignored is the idea that these assets are actually in theater already in Germany, in Poland, and around that area. I mean, there's something like, I don't know, I think it's 120,000 troops there right now. And there certainly are armored groups that are there, so it seems to me that this is the way that they tiptoe us into direct conflict. We agree to send these more and more advanced weapon systems that require more and more support logistics. And then it's just going to be necessary for us to then have troops there too. And the troops are already there. We have the 101st Airborne, in Romania still. I mean, there's a lot there.
Sure. And then Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia are full of American operatives and soldiers and tanks. Maybe they'll want to open up another front in the war, have some kind of a provocation or an excuse for that. This is really dangerous because Russia does have lots of nuclear weapons. That's well known. So where do they think this is going to end? And what point does it serve? Because, look, first of all, I know that Putin is the devil incarnate. He's the worst person in world history since Hitler. This is what everybody says, or everybody thinks, of course. But the fact of the matter is, he's a Russian bureaucrat. That's really what he is, worked for the KGB. And since he's been president of Russia, fact of the matter is, what he's done has been pretty good. He's privatized the economy to a great extent. He's cut the income tax rate for Russians down to 10 or 12%, more or less stabilized the currency, made it possible for Russians to travel internationally. Yeah. I mean, look, Russia's got a really sad and blood-soaked history. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if Ludwig von Mises or Friedrich Hayek was running Russia. They couldn't turn the place around on a dime. But all things considered, with Russia's history and so forth, Putin has not been bad, and he made overtures to the West, and he was turned away. So what's going on here? Does America need an enemy that badly that it's looking to foment a war with Russia?
Well, when we first started this podcast, Doug, you hypothesized that World War III had to occur because as things fell apart domestically, we would need an external enemy. I mean, is that where we're at? Do you think that it's
Yeah, but this is hunting big game. This isn't, the usual drill for the American deep state where you pick up some indefensible little shithole country like Grenada or Nicaragua or El Salvador, well, we send troops to Haiti every decade, which does absolutely no good. So, or for that matter, even Iraq or Afghanistan, picking wars with these nothing nowhere countries. I mean, Russia's hunting big game. So this is really just incredible. And it's pointless because I'll make a prediction, and this is going to happen to many of the countries on the face of the globe over the next generation. But if you just left Russia alone, which is nothing but a gas station with an attached gun store in the middle of a wheat field, there's nothing that's really produced in that country that's viable for export, except for one of those three things.
Well, yeah, the weapon systems is a big one. Yeah, you're right, which is proving to their advantage now.
Yeah. So what's going to happen with Russia? Because I've been to Russia and the Soviet Union, I don't know, half a dozen times over the years. And the place is an embarrassment. I mean, obviously, if they concentrate everything they have towards building rockets and a space program and military stuff, yes, a lot of smart people, the capital that they have is all directed there. They can turn out pretty reasonable products. But once you get out of Moscow and Leningrad, it's a third world country. It's a third world country with white people, is what it is. So it's primitive. It's actually primitive, where once you get out of those major cities in Eastern Russia, I mean, indoor plumbing is semi-rare, for instance.
So you're saying if we would just have left them alone, if you really, that they would just fall apart under their own weight over time, become less and less of a factor in the world stage.
Exactly. Well, even more than that, I'll go further than that. It's that Russia, even after the other republics broke off from the old Soviet Union, there are scores of so-called federated republics and autonomous areas and semi-independent oblasts that all have their own separate deals throughout Russia with their own ethnic groups that have their own traditions, their own language. And ethnic Russians are just more than half of the population of Russia itself. So my guess is that there will be secession movements from Moscow over the next generation. And when that happens, it's going to be more chaos in that part of the world. But that's going to happen. Russia's going to fall apart and become a rump state anyway. So why are they risking World War III with nuclear weapons and probably biological weapons and, of course, cyber weapons and God knows what? It's idiotic, actually.
But it's hard to imagine that this goes back to the whole COVID hysteria and how idiotic the decisions were made. It's hard to imagine that there are that many people that are that stupid that would be pushing us in this direction toward seeming just like something, seemingly a repeat of World War I and World War II. I mean, but maybe a lot worse this time. It's just, it doesn't like, it's the thing that the idea, or sorry, imagining that they're incompetent, that they're idiots, I just doesn't seem like that's a good enough explanation. I don't understand what's going on, but that can't just be it. This is too big of a mistake.
Yeah, perhaps evil actually does exist in a tangible form in the world, where there are people that are just destructive and have really bad intentions towards other people, or for that matter, towards themselves. And they exist and they gravitate towards Washington, D.C., which is where all the power is, all the money is. Yeah, it makes sense to me. The worst people in the world gravitate towards Washington, D.C. in the same way as gamblers gravitate towards Las Vegas and wannabe movie stars gravitate towards Los Angeles. And it's different places attract different types of people. So they've got these horrible people in Washington, and they get together and they have much, and this is absolutely true of the congressman, which is one reason I was very happy to see that, who is that pathological liar from?
George Santos?
Yes, exactly. Because he's like a shining light for them all to imitate, although they say he's awful, but they're all basically like him. They're all that personality type. That's who you get around the Beltway, and they have much more in common with each other than they do with the people that they're supposed to represent,
regardless of party.
regardless of party. Makes no difference at all. Makes no difference at all.
Well, I think
So,
these things fundamentally are damaging to the normal people. I mean, obviously everything that's happened in Ukraine today, it's been obviously lots of soldiers have died and been wounded on both sides, but it's just devastating toward your average Ukrainian, absolutely devastating toward them.
well, and towards the average American too, because I'm on a Zoom group, which I've mentioned here in the past, with a bunch of they're a bunch of
Wealthy cosmopolitan types.
exactly. And these people almost universally feel that we have to destroy Russia at this point. I mean, they buy what they hear on CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times and the Washington Post. And these are intelligent, rich people, and they parrot it back to each other in kind of an echo chamber.
Amazing.
Where they reinforce each other's beliefs. And, you know, I don't know why they still tolerate me as a member of the group, but perhaps they view me as free entertainment, or perhaps it makes them feel like they're being fair and balanced by having 1 out of 25 people that doesn't believe exactly what
it doesn't think that state-powered bloodshed is a good thing.
Well, and they see themselves as being pro-freedom, which is just the opposite of the case, and pro-America, because this is actually acting to destroy America as it exists. Forget about the ideals of America. Now, this is going to end very badly. So, what are the Russians going to do when they're confronted with a bunch of new weapons, which are better than the weapons that they have? What are they going to do? What's their next chess move going to be?
It's hard to say. I just don't see it going well. I mean, if they get backed into a corner, then they have to use. Because it is an existential threat to them. You'd have to imagine that they use the nukes they've got. What else can they do?
Small ones. I mean, hopefully not on London or Berlin, but maybe drop, some tactical 1 to 5 kiloton weapons on troop concentrations, just to say, don't do this.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely see it happening. And you talked about freedom and people who are pro-freedom but pro-war. I find that so funny because there's some headlines I saw this week that relate to that pro-freedom relating to Ukrainians. In particular, the Ukrainian government is demanding that other European countries extradite young fighting age Ukrainian males back to Ukraine so that they can be enlisted in the military and sent to the meat grinder. So that's really not really pro-freedom, I don't think at all. And that's the kind of thing that happens in war.
Well, it's actually quite shocking that Zelensky, who, as far as I can tell, is just a nothing nobody actor, is being promoted as a George Washington type figure, but he's practically a dictator in the Ukraine. You can't practice Russian Orthodox religion. You're not allowed to speak Russian. He's turned it into a police state. And what you're saying, where they're rounding up Ukrainians that have escaped from the Ukraine to go someplace where they're not involved in the war. I mean, this is just amazing. It's like press ganging people to act as cannon fodder.
Yes, it's exactly what it is. And I'll show you a couple of quick videos that I found on Twitter where they're rounding up people, young men in Ukraine is what these are. But you can just see what happens here. Just let it play. I've got a couple of these. There are lots of these out there I could show you, but there's a few of them.
Смотри, охуеть. Это беспредел.
He's just black bagging him and moving him to the front lines. And it's not just him. I mean, there's another one, an older guy, bringing him out of his home. You know, covered faces with the baklavas. I mean, it's pretty amazing, isn't it?
It's amazing that the Ukraine is supported as a country. I mean, and nobody seems to talk about the fact that Joe Biden's son was collecting millions of dollars from a Ukrainian oil company. He knows nothing about oil. It was obviously, no, that's forgotten. The fact that sham bank fraud, whatever his name was dealing with billions of dollars to the Ukraine. I mean, this is the Ukraine is basically a money laundering operation. Not that there's anything wrong with laundering money. That's an artificial crime that was created out of whole cloth 30 years ago. And that's a subject for a different discussion. But this is all just quite shameful.
Yeah, I heard this argument, Doug, about that I was comparing like the British Empire versus the American Empire. And in the British Empire, there was this basic idea that going and conquering other peoples, was done, for, even people might not like it, but it's kind of manifest destiny. It's like for the good of the people and kind of spreading civilization. And so people could look at the people that they conquered in the British Empire, not necessarily as evil, but the American Empire is built on different values of truth, justice, the American way, freedom, all of that. And so every person we go to war with must be painted as a literal Hitler. And so we have to pretend everyone is so evil, completely evil, no good parts about them, in order to gin up the American people enough to go to war with them. What do you think about that kind of point of view?
Well, it speaks very poorly of the American people that they can be riled up and start hooting and panting like chimpanzees around a watering hole just because their leaders say that they should do this. Yeah. It's whatever happened to mind your own business, okay?
Well, I mean, again, when you like with that group of intelligent, wealthy people that you're on that Zoom call with, they believe they're doing the right thing. They believe that like they're standing up for the values of truth, justice, and the American way to go and try and wipe Putin or maybe Russia off the map. I mean, it's just
well, and of course, everybody in almost every country thinks that God's on their side because their government tells them that God's on their side. But wars are almost never in the interest of the country and the people. It's in the interest of the people that run the government.
Exactly. War is the health of the state. You've said that many times. I have one more quick video I'd like to show you. This is Zelensky, who did a video conference for the Boca Raton Chamber of Commerce. It's amazing. Let me just find this. I got to share it with you because it just shows you what this is. This just the grift, the scam of this all is actually breathtaking. And just let me know if you can't hear it, Doug, when I get this started here.
It's obvious that American business can become the locomotive that will once again push forward global economic growth. We have already managed to attract attention and have cooperation with such giants of the international financial and investment world as BlackRock, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs. Such American brands as Starlink or Westinghouse have already become part of our Ukrainian way. Your brilliant defense systems, such as HIMARS or Bradleys, are already uniting our history of freedom with your enterprises. We are waiting for Patriots. We are looking closely at Abrams. Thousands of such examples are possible, and everyone can become a big business by working with Ukraine in all sectors, from weapons and defense to construction, from communication to agriculture, from transport to IT, from banks to medicine. And I believe that freedom must always win.
So see, Doug, it's not just about freedom. It's also we can get rich. We can get rich here too.
Yeah, yeah. Send us more money, because native Ukrainians, it's just amazing. He mentions weapons all the time. Send us more money, and he constantly mentions freedom. There's no freedom in the Ukraine at all.
Not at all.
You know, I'll tell you another thing that impresses me about Zelensky is he wears this faux military T-shirt. I say that because it's kind of a greenish khaki color, so it's the type of thing that the army would wear. But basically, Zelensky dresses like sham bankman fraud. They dress alike. The only difference between the two, they even look alike, is that Zelensky, because he's an actor, keeps himself in better shape. He doesn't look like he needs a professional boob job the way the guy did. So the fact that you have people like this, and you'll recall before bankman fraud was extradited from the Bahamas, which is another story. How what was it, a $250 million bond, and he got off with this. The corruption from top to bottom is just shocking. But the fact that people like this are put on exhibit, where only just before he was extradited, he was on stage with Janet Yellen and
Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg.
Yes, exactly. It's
shocking. It's shocking.
It is.
But I just love the fact that he's at some Boca Chamber of Commerce meeting talking about JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs and talking about the great business opportunities for all sectors in Ukraine. I found that hilarious.
Yeah, well,
like tone deaf, sure.
For Hunter Biden and for bankman fraud, I mean, you should have brought them up as more relevant examples, actually.
I should have. That's true. That's true. So where do you think this does seem, we've been waiting on this offensive from the Russians who have increased the troop levels and all that, waiting for the ground to freeze. Seems like that's probably all there now. What do you think happens next? Where's the next flashpoint in Ukraine?
Well, if you know, once again, all we have is not just secondhand, all we have is third-hand information. But if I was the Russians at this point, I would take advantage of the fact that it's winter, and I'd launch an attack and wipe out the Ukrainian army, such as it is, during the winter, before the West has a chance to get further involved. And after they send tanks, then they're going to start sending anti-aircraft missiles and sending things that will allow the Ukrainians and their proxies, the Americans, to hit targets within Russia. And if they do that, the Russians are going to find that just unacceptable. They're going to have to counterattack. So how can this thing not spin out of control at this point?
Yeah, I guess what you're saying, though, is the best way probably for it to avoid that would be for Russia to move very quickly from here before the NATO countries get more resources in position to fight them off.
I think that's the way it's got to work, because you've got these horrible people in the European Union. It's not just the Americans that are also pumping for expanding the war against Russia.
Definitely. And the other thing, just, I don't know if you've seen this fact or heard about this, but there's this private military contractor called the Wagner Group. And from what I understand is most of the work, the fighting that's been done around this Bakhmut, I think is the name of the town, is actually, it hasn't been the Russian military. It's just been these private military contractor. Like it's interesting to see the rise of companies like that, and that this private, pseudo-private entity is essentially taking such a front row, a key, I guess, role in this whole thing. Does that surprise you?
That is interesting that the Russians have their own equivalent. In the West in recent times, we've had Sandline, we've had Executive Outcomes, we have Blackwater, which has changed its name several times. We have Triple Canopy. There are a number of big military contractors that do exactly this type of thing, using big time weapons in the United States and other Western countries. But when the Russians have one called the Wagner Group, they're all, people that are rounded up from
Exactly. They're all criminals, they say.
prisons, and I don't know who joins the Wagner Group, but I assume that they're absolutely the same kind of people that would join all the Western groups.
Right. Just ex-military guys who wanted a payday after, selling their life so cheaply working for the government.
Exactly. Rather than fight for an hourly wage, you get some big money working for a contractor. So, it's all lies. And of course, all the Americans believe that the Wagner Group, which may be true for all I know, but it's true of all these other groups, are, a bunch of hard cases that can't do anything else except, join a professional army.
So like the French Foreign Legion then.
Yeah, well, very, very much. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's interesting. And it'd be interesting the way this unfolds. I was surprised again. The reason I brought this topic up, and we've talked about it many times, is just that there seemed to be this change in tone where there's now an assumption that Europe is at war and we must act fast to stop it. And that seems like it's a different narrative than what has been told so far. It's been positioned as an isolated thing with an evil man, but it's been isolated to Ukraine. And now they're talking about Europe engulfed in war. That's a big deal.
Yeah, the only way to solve this thing is to, like Russia is those two republics should be independent. And if they want to merge with Russia, that's fine. And the Crimea, which has always been Russian, stays Russian. And whatever happens to the Ukraine, I'm sure Zelensky will become a multi-billionaire and he'll get lots of idiotic PC corporations to ship more money there. Look, Ukraine is a country like Romania. And there's an old catchphrase about Romania and the Romanian economy. Their only imports are stolen cars and their only exports are prostitutes. And it's the same thing for Ukraine.
That's true. Yeah. All right. Well, on that happy note, we'll leave it there for now, Doug, and we'll be back next week. So thank you very much. Have a good weekend.
You too, Matt. Thanks.